PROTT by Margaret St. Clair. Originally published in the January 1953 issue of Galaxy magazine, for which a French edition was released in 1964. Republished in an Italian magazine in 1953 and a Croatian one in 1979. Anthology appearances include Science Fiction Terror Tales in 1955, Best SF in the same year, and a French one in 1973. Appearances in collections of the author's stories include The Best of Margaret St. Clair in 1985 and a Compendium of Margaret St. Clair in 2020. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. PROTT. "Read it," said the spaceman. "You'll find it interesting under the circumstances. It's not long. One of the salvage crews found it tied to a signal rocket just outside the asteroid belt. It had been there quite a while. I thought of taking it to somebody at the university, a historian or somebody, but I don't suppose they'd be interested. They don't have any more free time than anybody else." He handed a metal cylinder to Fox across the table and ordered drinks for them both. Fox sipped from his glass before he opened the tube. "Sure you want me to read it now?" he asked. "Not much of a way to spend our free time." "Sure, go ahead and read it. What difference does it make?" So Fox spread out the M-Tex sheets. He began to read. Dating a diary in deep space offers special problems. Philosophic problems, I mean. That immense when is now, which, vexatious enough within a solar system, or even on the surface of a planet, becomes quite insoluble in deep, except empirically, or by predicating a sort of supertime, an enormous present moment which would extend over everything. And yet a diary entry must be dated, if only for convenience, so I will call today Tuesday and take the date of April 21st from the gauges. Tuesday it is. On this Tuesday, then, I am quite well and cheerful, snug and comfortable in the Ellis. The Ellis is a model of comfort and convenience. A man who couldn't be comfortable in it couldn't be comfortable anywhere. As to where I am, I could get the precise data from the calculators, but I think for the casual purposes of this record, it's enough to say that I am almost at the edges of the area where the PROTT are said to abound, and my speed is almost exactly that at which they are supposed to appear. I said I was well and cheerful. I am, but just under my euphoria, just at the edge of consciousness, I am aware of an intense loneliness. It's a normal response to the deep space situation, I think, and I am upborne by the feeling that I stand on the threshold of unique scientific discoveries. Thursday the 26th. My days are more than 24 hours long. Today my loneliness is definitely conscious. I am troubled, too, by the fear that perhaps the PROTT aren't going to, put in an appearance. After all, their existence is none too well confirmed. And then what becomes of all my plans, of my smug confidence of a niche for myself in the Hall of Fame of good investigators? It seemed like a brilliant idea when I was on Earth. I know the Bursar thought so too when I asked for funds for the project, to investigate the life habits of a non-protoplasmic form of life with special emphasis on its reproduction. Excellent! But now? Saturday, April 30th. Still no PROTT, but I'm feeling better. I went over my files on them, and again it seems to me that there is only one conclusion possible. They exist. Over an enormous sector in the depth of space, during many years, they have been sighted. For my own comfort, let's list the known facts about PROTT. First, they are a non-protoplasmic form of life. How could they be otherwise in this lightless, heatless gulf? Second, their bodily organization is probably electrical. Simmons, who was electrical engineer on the Thor, found that his batteries showed discharges when PROTT were around. Third, they appear only to ships which are in motion between certain rates of speed. Whether motion at certain speeds attracts them, or whether it is only at certain frequencies that they are visible, we don't know. Fourth, whether or not they are intelligent, they are to some extent telepathic, according to the reports. This fact, of course, is my hope of communicating with them at all. And fifth, PROTT have been evocatively, if unscientifically, described as looking like big poached eggs. On the basis of these facts, I've aspired to be the Columbus, or more accurately, the Dr. Kinsey of the PROTT. Well, it's good to know that, lonely and rather worried as I am, I can still laugh at my own jokes. May 3rd. I saw my first PROTT. More later. It's enough for now. I saw my first PROTT. May 4th. The Ellis has all-angle viewing plates through 360 degrees. I had set up an automatic signal, and yesterday it rang. My heart thumping with an almost painful excitement, I ran to the battery of plates. There it was, seemingly some 5 yards long, a cloudy, whitish thing. There was a hint of a large yellow nucleus. Damned if the thing didn't look like a big poached egg. I saw at once why everyone has assumed that PROTT are life forms and not, for example, minute spaceships, robots, or machines of some sort. The thing had the irregular, illogical symmetry of life. I stood goggling at it. It wasn't alarming, even in its enormous context. After a moment it seemed to flirt away from the ship with the watery ease of a fish. I waited hopefully, but it didn't come back. May 4th. No PROTT. Question. Since there is so little light in deep space, how was I able to see it? It wasn't luminous. I wish I had had more training in electronics and allied subjects, but the Bursar thought it more important to send out a man trained in survey techniques. May 5th. No PROTT. May 6th. No PROTT, but I have been having very odd thoughts. May 8th. As I half implied in my last entry, the ideas I've been having, such odd ideas, they made me feel mentally as if some supporting membrane of my personality were being overstrained, were an indication of the proximity of PROTT. I had just finished eating lunch today when the automatic signal rang. I hurried to the viewers. There, perfectly clear against their jet-black background, were 3 PROTT. 2 were almost identical. 1 was slightly smaller in size. I had retraced over and over in my mind the glimpse of the one PROTT I had had before, but now that 3 of them were actually present in the viewers, I could only stare at them. They're not alarming, but they do have an odd effect upon the mind. After several tense seconds, I recovered my wits. I pressed a button to set the automatic photographic records going. I'd put in plates to cover the whole spectrum of radiant energy, and it will be interesting when I go to develop my pictures to see what frequencies catch the PROTT best. I also, this was more difficult, began to send out the basic who, in which all telepathic communicators are trained. I have become reasonably good at telepathy through practice, but I have no natural talent for it. I remember McElrath telling me jokingly, just before I left New York, that I'd never have trouble with one of the pitfalls of natural telepaths, transmitting a desired answer into the mind of a subject by telepathy. I suppose any deficiency has some advantageous side. I began to send out my basic who. It may have been only a coincidence, but as soon as the 4th or 5th impulse had left my mind, all 3 PROTT slid out of the viewing plates. They didn't come back. It would seem that my attempts at communication alarmed them. I hope not, though. When I was convinced that they would not return for a while, I began to develop my plates. Those in the range of visible light show the PROTT very much as they appear to the eye. The infrared plates show nothing at all, but the ultraviolet sensitive ones are really interesting. Two of the PROTT appear as a network of luminous lines intricately knotted and braided. For some reason, I was reminded of the elfish light of Coleridge's water snakes, which, quote, moved in tracks of shining white, end quote. The third PROTT, which I assumed to have been the smaller one, gave an opaque, flattened ovoid image, definitely smaller than that of its companions, with a round, dark shadow in the center. This shadow would appear to be the large yellow nucleus. Question: do these photographic differences correspond to organizational differences? Probably, though it might be a matter of phase. Further question: if the difference is in fact organizational, do we have here an instance of that specialization which, among protoplasmic creatures, would correspond to sex? It is possible, but such theorizing is bound to be plain guesswork. May 9th. I see I gave up dating by days some while ago. No PROTT. I think it would be of some interest if at this point I were to try to put down my impression of those odd thoughts which I believe the PROTT inspired in me. In the first place, there is a reluctance. I didn't want to think what I was thinking. This is not because the ideas were in themselves repellent or disgusting, but because they were uncongenial to my mind. I don't mean uncongenial to my personality or my idiosyncrasies, to the sum of differences that make up me, but uncongenial to the whole biological orientation of my thinking. The differences between protoplasmic and non-protoplasmic life must be enormous. In the second place, there is a frustration. I said I didn't want to think what I was thinking, but it would be equally true to say that I couldn't think it. Hence, I suppose, that sensation of ineffectuality. And in the third place, there is a great boredom. Frustration often does make one feel bored, I suppose. I couldn't apprehend my own thoughts. But whenever I finally did, I found them boring. They were so remote, so incomprehensible, that they were uninteresting. But the thoughts themselves? What were they? I can't say. How confused all this is. Well, nothing is more tiresome than to describe the indescribable. Perhaps it is true that the only creature that could understand the thoughts of a PROTT would be another PROTT. May 10th. Were the odd thoughts the results of attempts on the PROTT's part to communicate with me? I don't think so. I believe they were near the ship, but out of view shot, so to speak, and I picked up some of their interpersonal communications accidentally. I've been devoting a good deal of thought to the problem of communicating with them. It is too bad that there is no way of projecting a visual image of myself onto the exterior of the ship. I have Matheson's signaling devices, and next time, if there is a next, I shall certainly try them. I have little confidence in devices, however. I feel intuitively that it is going to have to be telepathy or nothing. But if they respond to the basic who with flight, well, I must think of something else. Suppose I were to begin the attempt at contact with a split question. Splits are hard for any telepath, almost impossible for me. But in just that difficulty, my hope of success might lie. After all, I suppose the PROTT flirted away from the ship at my who, because mental contact with me was painful to them. Later. 4 of them are here now. I tried a split and they went away but came back. I'm going to try something else. May 11th. It worked. My 3-way split something I had only read about in journals, but that I would never have believed myself capable of, was astoundingly effective. Not at first, though. At my first attempt, the PROTT darted right out of the viewers. I had a moment of despair. Then, with an almost human effect of hesitation, reluctance, and inclination, they came back. They clustered around the viewer. Once more I sent out my impulse. Sweat was running down my back with the effort. And they stayed. I don't know what I should have done if they hadn't. A split is exhausting because, in addition to the 3 normal axes of the mind, it involves a 4th one, at right angles to all the others. A telepath would know what I mean. But a 3-way split is, in the old-fashioned phrase, lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. Some experts say it's impossible. I still have trouble believing I brought it off. I did, however. There was a sudden rush, a gush of communication. I'd like to try to get it down now while it's still fresh in my mind, but I'm too tired. Even the effort of using the playback is almost beyond me. I've got to rest. Later. I've been asleep for 4 hours. I don't think I ever slept so soundly. Now I'm almost myself again, except that my hands shake. I said I wanted to get the communication with the PROTT down while it was still fresh. Already it has begun to seem a little remote, I suppose because the subject matter was inherently alien. But the primary impression I retain of it is the gush, the suddenness. It was like pulling the cork out of a bottle of warm champagne which has been thoroughly shaken up. In the middle, I had to try to maintain my mental balance in the flood. It was difficult. No wonder the effort left me so tired. But I did learn basic things. 1. Identity. The PROTT are individuals, and though their designations for themselves escape me, they have individual consciousness. This is not a small matter. Some protoplasmic life forms have only group consciousness. Each of the 4 PROTT in my viewer was thoroughly aware of itself as distinct from the others. 2. Difference. The PROTT were not only aware of identity, they were aware of differences of class between themselves, and I am of the opinion that these differences correspond to those shown on my photographic plates. 3. Place. The PROTT are quite clearly conscious that they are here and not somewhere else. This may seem either trivial or so basic as not to be worth bothering with, but there are whole groups of protoplasmic life forms on Venus whose only cognizance of place is a distinction between me and not me. 4. Time. For the PROTT, time is, as it is for us, an irreversible flowing in one direction only. I caught in their thinking a hint of a discrimination between biological, for such a life form, that is what it seemed, time, and something else, I am not sure what. Beyond these 4 basic things, I am unsure. I do feel, though it is perhaps over-optimistic of me, that further communication of great interest, is possible. I feel that I may be able to discover what their optimum life conditions and habitat are. I do not despair of discovering how they reproduce themselves. I have the feeling that there is something they want very much to tell me. May 13th. 6 PROTT today. According to my photographic record, only one of them was of the opaque, solid nucleus kind. The others all showed the luminous, light-tracked mesh. The communication was difficult. It is exhausting to me physically. I had again that sense of psychic pressure, of urgency in their sendings. If I only knew what they wanted to talk about, it would be so much easier for me. I have the impression that they have a psychic itch they want me to help them scratch. That's silly? Yes, I know, yet that is the odd impression I have. After they were gone, I analyzed my photographs carefully. The knotted light meshes are not identical in individuals. If the patterns are constant for individuals, it would seem that two of the light mesh kind have been here before. What do they want to talk about? May 14th. Today the PROTT, 7 of them, and I communicated about habitat. This much is fairly certain. It would appear, and I think that from now on any statement I make about them is going to have to be heavily qualified. It would appear that they are not necessarily confined to the lightless, heatless depths of space. I can't be sure about this, but I thought I got the hint of something solid in their thinking. Wild speculation. Do they get their energy from stars? Behind their sendings, I got again the hint of some other more desired communication, something which at once attracts and repels, frightens, embarrasses. Sometimes the humor of my situation comes to me suddenly, an embarrassed PROTT. But I suppose there's no reason why not. All my visitors today were of the knotted network kind. May 16th. No PROTT yesterday or today. May 18th. At last, 3 PROTT. From subsequent analysis of the network patterns, all had been here to interview me before. We began communication about habitat and what, with protoplasm, would be metabolic processes, but they did not seem interested. They left soon. Why did they visit the ship anyhow? Curiosity? That motive must not be so powerful by now, because of something they want from me? I imagine so. It is again an awareness of some psychic itch, and that gives me a lead as to the course I should follow. The next time they appear, I shall try to be more passive in my communications. I shall try not to lead them on to any particular subject. Not only is this good interviewing technique, it is essential in this case if I am to gain their full cooperation. May 20th. After a fruitless wait yesterday, today there was one lone PROTT. In accordance with my recent decision, I adopted a highly passive attitude toward it. I sent out signals of willingness and receptivity, and I waited, watching the PROTT. For 5 or 10 minutes there was silence. The PROTT moved about in the viewers with an effect of restlessness, though it might have been any other emotion, of course. Suddenly, with great haste and urgency, it began to send. I had again that image of the cork blowing out of the champagne bottle. Its sending was remarkably difficult for me to follow. At the end of the first 3 minutes or so, I was wringing wet with sweat. Its communications were repetitive, urgent, and, I believe, pleasurable. I simply had no terms into which to translate them. They seemed to involve many verbs. I listened passively, trying to preserve my mental equilibrium. My bewilderment increased as the PROTT continued to send. Finally, I had to recognize that I was getting to a point where intellectual frustration would interfere with my telepathy. I ventured to put a question, a simple, "Please classify," to the PROTT. Its sending slackened and then ceased abruptly. It disappeared. What did I learn from the interview? That the passive approach is the correct one, and that a PROTT will send freely, and most confusingly, as far as I'm concerned, if it is not harassed with questions or directed to a particular topic. What I didn't learn was what the PROTT was sending about. Whatever it was, I have the impression that it was highly agreeable to the PROTT. Later. I have been rereading the notes I made on my sessions with the PROTT. What has been the matter with me? I wonder at my blindness, for the topic about which the PROTT was sending, the pleasurable, repetitive, embarrassing topic, the one about which it could not bear to be questioned, the subject which involved so many verbs, that topic could be nothing other than its sex life. When put this baldly, it sounds ridiculous. I make haste to qualify it. We don't, as yet, and what a triumph it is to be able to say as yet, know anything about the manner in which PROTT reproduce themselves. They may, for example, increase by a sort of fission. They may be dioecious, as so much highly organized life is, or their reproductive cycle may involve the cooperative activity of 2, 3, or even more different sorts of PROTT. So far, I have seen only the 2 sorts, those with the solid nucleus and those with the intricate network of light. That does not mean there may not be other kinds. But what I am driving at is this. The topic about which the PROTT communicated with me today is one which, to the PROTT, has the same emotional and psychic value that sex has to protoplasmic life. Somehow, at this point, I am reminded of a little anecdote of my grandmother's. She used to say that there are 4 things in a dog's life which it is important for it to keep in mind, 1 for each foot. The things are food, food, sex, and food. She bred dachshunds, and she knew. Question. Does my coming up with this recollection at this time mean that I suspect the PROTT's copulatory activity is also nutritive, like the way in which amoeba conjugate? Their exchange of nuclei seems to have a beneficial effect on their metabolism. Be that as it may, I now have a thesis to test in my dealings with the PROTT. May 21st. There were 7 PROTT in the viewer when the signal rang. While I watched, more and more arrived. It was impossible to count them accurately, but I think there must have been at least 15. They started communicating almost immediately. Not wanting to disturb them with directives, I attempted to listen passively, but the effect on me was that of being caught in a crowd of people all talking at once. After a few minutes, I was compelled to ask them to send one at a time. From then on, the sending was entirely orderly but incomprehensible, so much so that at the end of some 2 hours, I was forced to break off the interview. It is the first time I have ever done such a thing. Why did I do it? My motives are not entirely clear, even to myself. I was trying to receive passively, keeping in mind the theory I had formed about the PROTT's communication, and let me say at this point that I have found nothing to contradict it, nothing whatever. Yet, as time passed, my bewilderment increased almost painfully. Out of the mass of chaotic, repetitive material presented to me, I was able to form not one single clear idea. I would not have believed that a merely intellectual frustration could be so difficult to take. The communication itself was less difficult than yesterday. I must think. I have begun to lose weight. June 12th. I have not made an entry in my diary for a long time. In the interval, I have had 36 interviews with PROTT. What emerges from these sessions, which are so painful and frustrating to me, so highly enjoyed by the PROTT? First, communication with them has become very much easier. It has become, in fact, too easy. I continually find their thoughts intruding on me at times when I cannot welcome them, when I'm eating, writing up my notes, or trying to sleep. But the strain of communication is much less, and I suppose that does constitute an advance. Second, out of the welter of material presented to me, I have at last succeeded in forming one fairly clear idea. That is, that the main topic of the PROTT's communication is a process that could be represented verbally as ing the... I add at once that the blanks do not necessarily represent an obscenity. I have, in fact, no idea what they do represent. The phrases that come into mind in this connection are kicking the bucket and belling the cat. It may not be without significance that one of these phrases relates to death and the other to danger. Communication with PROTT is so unsatisfactory that one cannot afford to neglect any intimations that might clarify it. It is possible that ing the is something which is potentially dangerous to PROTT, but that's only a guess. I could have it all wrong, and I probably do. At any rate, my future course has become clear. From now on, I will attempt, by every mental means at my disposal, to get the PROTT to specify what ing the is. There is no longer any fear of losing their cooperation. Even as I dictate these words to the playback, they are sending more material about ing the to me. June 30th. The time has gone very quickly, and yet each individual moment is dragged. I have had 52 formal interviews with PROTT. They appear in crowds ranging from 15 to 40 or so, and countless informal ones. My photographic record shows that more than 90% of those that have appeared have been of the luminous network kind. In all this communication, what have I learned? It gives me a sort of bitter satisfaction to say, nothing at all. I am too chagrined to go on. July 1st. I don't mean that I haven't explored avenue after avenue. For instance, at one time it appeared that ing the had something to do with the intersections of the luminous network in PROTT of that sort. When I attempted to pursue this idea, I met with a negative that seemed amused as well as indignant. They indicated that ing the was concerned with the whitish body surfaces, but when I picked up the theme, I got another negative signal, and so on. I must have attacked the problem with 50 different angles, but I had to give up on all of them. Ing the, it would appear, is electrical, non-electrical, solitary, dual, triple, communal, constant, never done at all. At one time, I thought that it might apply to any pleasurable activity, but the PROTT signaled that I was all wrong. I broke that session off short. Outside of their baffling communications on the subject of ing the, I have learned almost nothing from the PROTT. How sick I am of them and their inane, vacuous babbling. The phrases of our communication ring in my mind for hours afterward. They haunt me like a clinging odor or stubbornly lingering taste. During one session, a PROTT, solid nucleus, I think, but I'm not sure, informed me that they could live under a wide variety of conditions, provided there was a source of radiant energy not too remote. Besides that scrap of information, I have an impression that they are grateful to me for listening to them. Their feelings, I think, could be expressed in the words understanding and sympathetic. I don't know why they think so, I'm sure. I would rather communicate with a swarm of dogfish, which are primitively telepathic, than listen to any more PROTT. I have had to punch another hole in my wristwatch strap to take up the slack. This makes the third one. July 3rd. It is difficult for me to use the playback. The PROTT are sending so hard. I have scarcely a moment's rest from their communications, all concerned with the same damned subject. But I have come to a resolve. I am going home. Yes, home. It may be that I have failed in my project because of inner weaknesses. It may be that no man alive could have accomplished more. I don't know. But I ache to get away from them and the flabby texture of their babbling minds. If only there were some way of shutting them off or stopping my mental ears against them temporarily, I think I could stand it. But there isn't. I'm going home. I've started putting course data in the computers. July 4th. They say they're going back with me. It seems they like me so much they don't want to be without me. I will have to decide. July 12th. It is dreadfully hard to think. for they're sending like mad. I am not so altruistic, so unselfish that I would condemn myself to a lifetime of listening to PROTT if I could get out of it. But suppose I ignore the warnings of instinct, the dictates of conscience, and return to Earth anyhow. What will be the result? The PROTT will go with me. I will not be rid of them, and I will have loosed a wave of PROTT on Earth. They want passionately to send about They have discovered that Earthmen are potential receptors. I have myself to blame for that. If I show them the way to Earth, the dilemma is inherently comic, I suppose. It is nonetheless real. Oh, it is possible that there is some way of destroying PROTT, and that the resources of Earth intelligence might discover it. Or, failing that, we might be able to work out a way of living with them. But the danger is too great. I dare not ask my planet to face it. I will stay here. The Ellis is a strong, comfortable ship. According to my calculations, there is enough air, water, and food to last me the rest of my natural life. Power, since I am not going back, I have in abundance. I ought to get along all right. Except for the PROTT. When I think of them, my heart contracts with despair and revulsion. And yet, a scientist must be honest. It is not all despair. I feel a little sorry for them, a little flattered at their need for me, and I am not, even now, altogether hopeless. Perhaps someday, I shall understand the PROTT. I'm going to put this diary in a permalloy cylinder and jet it away from the ship with a signal rocket. I can soup up the rocket's charge with power from the fuel tanks. I've tried it on the calculators, and I think the rocket can make it to the edge of the gravitational field of the solar system. Goodbye, Earth. I'm doing it for you. Remember me. Fox put the last page of the manuscript down. "The poor bastard," he said. "Yeah, the poor bastard, sitting out there in deep space year after year, listening to those things belly-aching and thinking what a savior he was. I can't say I feel much sympathy for him, really. I suppose they followed the signal rocket back. Yeah, and then they increased. Oh, he fixed it all right." There was a depressed silence. Then Fox said, "I'd better go. Impatient. And mine, too." They said goodbye to each other on the curb. Fox stood waiting, still not quite hopeless. But after a moment, the hateful voice within his head began, "I want to tell you more about the..." You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.